If you're one of the millions of people every year that decides to jump into the game of owning and running your own business, this podcast is for you. One of the things that you're all going to run into are mistakes that you'll make along the way. But the problem is, we all, and I'm talking about myself, we all make too many mistakes that have already made many times before us. So today, what we're going to talk about are the things you need to avoid to ensure you don't fall into that statistical pile of businesses that didn't make it. Hi, I'm Steve Smith. You're watching the Business Wingman podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Travis Smith. And today we're going to be talking about 8 fundamental mistakes that many businesses make when they're in their startup phase. And many of the times these things either prevent them from becoming the businesses they could be, or they just completely close them down altogether because the problems that are associated just become too great and you can't walk away from it. We're getting this information today from an article that was written by a company called FE Towers, and it appeared on LinkedIn in LinkedIn's article area. But it was a pretty good article, and I thought it was really worth diving into and talking about some of these things and sharing our own experiences of what we've run into and maybe the things we did to keep ourselves from falling prey to some of these mistakes. So, Travis, which one of the ones on here, on these 8 that we're going to talk about, was one that you dealt with, or one that will always stick in your mind as something that you had to avoid, and you tell other people to not do the same thing?
I'm happy to answer that. But, I got to say, even though we're years into this, I still just am marveled about the way that you open up this show. It's just so smooth. You do such a good job with that.
Nobody wants to hear that. They came to learn.
It's funny, this discussion today, there is a never-ending amount of content and detail online that any business owner can access today, right? That talks about the mistakes business owners make, entrepreneurs make. Yet the funny thing is, you and I both, we all continue to make these same damn mistakes.
Right.
Why is that? I would love the psychology piece. I would love to explore that at another time, because all of this information is readily out there, easy to access.
Well, okay, so you're right. That's probably a whole different episode, but I can tell you, as I went through these 8 and realized that the vast majority of them fall under the category of pre-planning, doing things up front to avoid the pitfalls that will come later on if you don't. And what I realized from my own journey and from helping literally hundreds of other business owners in similar situations is the euphoria that attacks your head when you all of a sudden realize, I can do it. I have a business idea here that's going to make $1 million. The emotion just completely takes over and shuts down any critical thinking that you might have in the moment. And I think that's one of the reasons why people, they rush into things, they make those same mistakes because they don't talk to other people that have gone before them or do any kind of research. They're just all in their head about how great this idea is. Now, that euphoria wears off, but by the time it wears off, a lot of the damage has been done.
I think you're 100% right. And when a lot of times they have this idea and they're going to start putting money towards it and time towards it, it's amazing how little research people will do to understand the market and whether or not that's even a need, or
Yes.
understand who the customers are and what the customers actually want, right?
Right.
And the reason I say that is because this article that you had mentioned earlier, there are 8 different items in here that the writers have identified as kind of the top 8 mistakes business owners make. And number 3 in particular, and then number 7 are the 2 that I intend to talk about. So
Okay.
Number 3 is failing to understand your customers. And my takeaway from that is what your customers need and want and what their pains are, and does your product or service address those pains?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of goes back to what you were just saying, which is, have we run off through this kind of emotional roller coaster of, I'm going to change the world, right?
Right.
And we get out there and are our customers actually buying it, right?
Yeah. Oh, look,
But
well, I mean, one of the things, and I run into this a fair bit, When you finally, get that entrepreneurial, grip on yourself, um, there's usually other people around you, family, friends, people in your contact circle who are really rooting for you, and they should. You're taking a big journey. You're gonna invest a lot of yourself and your resources, and there's no guarantee. So you want people to be kind of your cheerleaders, but sometimes that din in the back of your head gets so loud that you don't really sit back and say, okay, is what I'm trying to sell, to make and sell, or offer and sell, is it actually marketable? Are there people out there that will buy this? Number one, buy it in general. Number two, buy it from me. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I think almost taking off your business owner hat and putting on your customer hat and saying, if I was the customer, what am I looking for?
Well,
What
and
makes
so
one
you're
better than another?
so I want to comment on something that you just said because I think it's really important is are my customers going to buy this? Meaning, do they need it? Does
Right.
it solve their problem? And are they going to buy it from me? Right? Those are two different issues.
Right.
The one thing, though, that I find interesting, and I see this a good bit in my industry, the medical device industry, um, there's this idea that we want to be massively changing the game. We want to be disruptors. We want to be bringing in a new technology that nobody's ever heard of, and it's completely novel,
Right.
right? The
We all want to
problem,
be renegades and rule breakers.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
I mentally understand that. The issue, though, with that is if you've not done something like that before and you don't have a really strong team around you, the thing that you may find to be an incredibly large hurdle is if you have to educate your customer or the industry on how to use your product or service because it's just never been done before, you really are in for an enormous task in front of you. And it's not to say people can't do it. Lots of people have done it and will continue to do it.
Right.
It's just if you don't know that process and you're not prepared to address that, that's an enormous amount of time, energy, and dollars that are going to be thrown into that. And
And you know what?
you have to plan for it.
That tends to lead into other bad acts down the road, like heavily discounting what you're selling because you feel, oh, it must be too expensive, so I'm going to give people a percentage discount, or buying leads, or incentivizing, salespeople to try to go out and find customers. Not that those tactics don't have merit, but if you're doing those because you can't find anybody to buy your product, then I think you haven't made the connection between what do I have as a solution and who needs it as, who's got a problem that needs it.
And that goes right into the second piece of of these 8 items that are in this article that
Right.
I personally find are one of the biggest issues for early businesses, startups, and entrepreneurs alike. It's item 7, not knowing when to pivot.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I bring this up is because it when people can see that something is not working, or that by changing something and doing something slightly different, it will produce a better result.
Yes.
Being able to see that and then act on that is such a valuable skill for anybody in leadership, management, business ownership, entrepreneurship, however you want to kind of carve that up. The reason I say that, and I'll share a personal story here, is about 4 years into our company being in existence, we sat down, and ironically, this was right before COVID. We're talking weeks before COVID set in here.
Okay.
We made a really important decision in our, now looking back on it, hindsight, of course, that makes it easier to see it.
Right.
But we made a really important decision in the trajectory and the path our company was going to be taking, which was we actually pared down, we reduced the services we were offering to make our
Oh,
company more niche.
interesting.
The interesting thing is, I see people do the opposite. It's
Right.
like, okay, we have 2 services, but we're not selling enough or we're not getting enough traction. So let's tack on 2 or 3 more services.
Right.
That'll help. That'll be the winning ticket.
Yes.
The thing though is when people do that, what they're doing is they're tacking on more shit into their business. And it's either A, confusing people, or B, it's
It
kind
just
of
fragments your
diluting the
focus.
brand.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas what we did was we went the opposite direction. We pivoted because we understood and we saw an opportunity in that, you know what? People are coming to us for X. We offer these other services that's not really getting traction. Let's just dump that
Right.
because 80% of our business today is within this other bucket over here.
Right.
Let's completely, and what we basically did was we rebranded the company and changed everything so that it was focused on that one bucket. And the funny thing was, within about 18 months of us making that decision, we had doubled the size of the company.
Wow. That is tremendous. Well, okay, so this whole idea of pivoting is what I call ugly baby syndrome. You know, people that come up with ideas that become businesses, whether they invent a product or they find a new way to deliver some service, it's their baby, and it doesn't matter how ugly it is. It's always going to be their baby. And so when you go to somebody and says, hey, you might want to look at the baby. It's not looking real good these days. A lot of people don't like that. And so it's very difficult for somebody to sit back and say, do we need to change what we're doing and how we're doing it for the betterment of the entity, the organization, even if it means we have to call our baby not so cute.
Yeah. And that's the thing, recognizing that you have to somewhat remove yourself emotionally from the company, from the product, from the service. Because if you can't do that, you're not going to understand the market and your customers and really what's in demand and what
Right.
these folks need. So if we as business owners, whether it's a product or a service, keep shoveling down people's throats, no, 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 you need this, I know best, and we're
Right.
not listening, you completely miss the mark. And this is where you see startups, uh, especially if they're on the product side, where it just seems like they've been in business for 3 or 4 years. They're not profitable. They've been around long enough to where they've had hundreds of meetings with customers, and it's just not biting, right? Yeah, they're making some sales here and there, but usually what it is they're making sales with people who are in that early adopter phase. Yeah, yeah, I'll try it out. Let me see if this actually works. But what they're typically not experiencing are the big enterprise sales
Hmm.
because those folks are not identifying your service, your product, or your solution as being what is really going to take them to the next level, solve their problems, improve their business, whatever that
Yes.
may mean.
All right, so one of the 8 items that happened to be listed first on this article that really resonated with me was the whole idea of failing to conduct any kind of proper market research. And I draw on that because in my 30 years in consumer products manufacturing, we did endless amounts of this stuff because you're always, it costs money to launch a product regionally or nationally or do something of that
Yeah.
scale. And I realize a lot of, small business owners, solo operating entrepreneurs, so to speak, they don't have the bandwidth or the resources to be able to conduct, research to that level. But there are things that you can do to basically vet the market that you're getting ready to jump into to figure out what's already there. And most importantly, what other people who have been there for a while are not looking at. Sometimes there's unfulfilled needs in an established market because everybody else, for some reason, is chasing the next greatest thing.
Mhm.
And they've left behind a chunk of customers who are still interested in something that's been around for a while, but it's not available anymore. So to be able to go on there and see who else is operating in this area, what are they offering? What are they not offering? Is what I'm bringing to the table a me too, or can I carve out a distinctive niche which will allow me to be unique and different? And and here's something that was pointed out to me a number of years ago, and I didn't really think about it this way, but you go into a market and sometimes people will say, well, there's nobody out there. I've got a wide open field. Well, number one, that's almost never going to happen. But number two, if you do find a complete absence of competitors offering similar things, what that might be saying is everybody was in that a number of years ago and found out it wasn't commercially viable, so they got
Right.
out.
That's a great point because just because there's a hole in the marketplace does not mean there's a desire for that hole to be filled,
Right.
right? And that kind of goes back to that old saying of not all problems need to be solved,
Yes.
right? So that's why
Yes.
it's so important to really do research about where the market is, how mature it is, right? There's an interesting case study that just actually, I believe it was earlier this year. Have you ever heard of not potato chips, and they may make potato chips, but it's more tortilla chips, a brand called Siete?
No, I don't. I've not heard of this particular case you're talking about.
So for the folks that are listening, Siete, it's spelled Siete, is a Hispanic chip brand. It was family owned. Been around for quite a while, I think 15, 20 years or so.
Was
But
that the original name when it was the family business?
so that's what's interesting. No.
Ah,
So when they started off selling their product, which was tortillas, tortilla chips, and so forth, it looked like everything else on the market. Really bland packaging, clear packaging. It's basically flour and corn tortillas stacked 20, 30 high, just like a lot of the other stuff you can see in the supermarket.
hmm.
Well, however long ago, it's been a while. My guess is between 5 and 8 years. Don't hold me accountable to that, but they basically rebranded their product to identify it more as a cultural and kind of heritage-based product that was
Mm.
in alignment with Hispanic foods,
Okay.
but it had a better look to it. Long story short, they just got picked up earlier this year for $1 billion. You're talking a potato chip, tortilla chip company, right? That was family owned.
Wow.
Here's the interesting thing. And the reason I bring up this whole case study is because if somebody's listening to us today and they have an idea, and that idea is in a market that's been around forever, it's incredibly mature, it may even be tough to get into. I mean, food products, you know better than I do how tough that is
Oh
to get
yeah.
shelf space in a
Yeah. I
market,
mean, it's a fist fight all day
right?
long.
Sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to do with how good your product is. So in this case, the potato chips. A lot of times it has to do with how your consumers identify with the product. That's the branding,
Right.
right? So in this particular instance, the company recognized that and pivoted and changed their branding to be more in alignment with what the consumer wanted, but it's the same product, same chips,
Right.
same tortillas,
Right.
right? I mean, it's an incredible case study. And
Okay.
then they
So
sell for a
so
billion dollars.
all right. So that story leads into number four in this article about having an inconsistent brand, or maybe a brand that doesn't reach the desired audience that you think it should. And I do see this quite a bit where people have a brand that either is just there's nothing identifiable about it, right? It doesn't bring anything to mind. And yet, the people that have bought it, they really love the product. They don't necessarily identify the brand with the product. They just like it because they've already tasted it. But a lot of times, people get into business and all of a sudden 10 years goes by and you think, wow, I'm established business. I've been here for 10 years. Well, that's good because at the 10-year mark, 80% of the businesses that started with you are already gone. That's what the batting average looks like. So you're 10 years in, that's great. Well, if you've still got a brand name that doesn't clearly speak to what you do or what people get from what you do, then you've missed the mark on even more sustainable growth. Because now the name, I mean, for a lot of companies, the name is worth more than what they actually make, because it's recognizable and it's expandable and you can do a lot with it. So early on, every single thing you do, from the post you put out on social media to how your website looks and reads to any kind of videos that you put out, anything that you put out on the internet that comes from you, if it's not surgically, aligned with the brand and with everything else that's out there, all you end up doing is diluting it and making people second guess whether it's you or somebody else.
Right. And going to your point, I brought up Siete a moment ago, so I pulled it up online. Earlier this year, maybe a couple months ago, so kind of September time period, they sold to Pepsi for $1.2 billion, a tortilla chip company. It's,
Wow.
it's an incredible story,
And that's a perfect purchase for Pepsi, because they're basically in the snack business, So buying that kind of stuff is just going to add to their brand. And if they bought a name that they can now put on their website with all the other brands they own, that's where the money. That's what was worth paying that much money.
So I want to talk about another item that's showing up in this article here because I got to admit I'm a little conflicted with this advice.
Oh,
So item number two of the 8 mistakes people make in small business entrepreneurship
right.
is failing to create a business plan, business model. Talk with me about what your thoughts are on that. This idea of does everybody need to create a business plan? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it is very, very sound advice that many times is misconstrued. And the first time you hear that, especially if you don't understand the benefit of it, it just conjures up all these thoughts of all this time you're going to be spending diving into minutia, and is it worth it? Okay. So just so everybody knows, you can go out on Google and you can find this stuff everywhere. Business plans can be as long as 100 pages. If you've got some big entity you're trying to put together and you're trying to attract, third party money, bank money, private investor money, you're probably going to need a lot of in-depth stuff for people to decide whether they're going to invest or not. But you can get business plans that are as simple as 1 page long. The reason that they're good is because it makes you think about the questions it asks. And it goes to a lot of the stuff we're talking about here now. What is the size of the market? Do
Mhm.
you understand the pool that you're jumping into? You know, how much resources do you have to bring to this new business? Do you have access to resources? You got to think about that. Gee, I can't do this for free. I've got to have some money somewhere. So what do I have to work with? So I think the business plan is really designed to force you to think outside your own box and answer questions about what is it going to take to establish an entity that ultimately is going to need to run by itself at some point. That's the reason for a business plan. And if you can't get through it and ask those questions and have those answers make sense, you need to go back to the drawing board because the idea for the product or service, that's the impetus for even going down this trail. Okay? If you don't know what the trail looks like or you can't envision what the things you're going to have to navigate along the way, which is what the business plan helps you with, you're flying blind. Now, when I started back in 2008, because I did a lot of research in, my own industry and business in general, the failure rate for small business within the first 2 years of opening was 65%. So 2/3 of everybody that started a business throughout the United States was not going to be doing it 2 years later or sometime sooner. That number's come down a little bit. It's now down in the low 50s, which I think is good. I can't exactly tell you why, but it has improved a bit. But you're still talking about a crapshoot, a flip of the coin. Half are going to make it, half are not. So you need to do everything you possibly can up front to make sure you're really clear about what you're diving into, what you're eventually going to offer some consumer base that's out there, and how you're going to run it to the point where it makes enough money to run itself.
I got to tell you, after that sermon, you should really think about going into politics. I think you've
No.
you've changed my vote
Yeah,
because,
I'm not that politically savvy, so but
well,
no, look, it is.
and
That's the why I chose to get into what I do. And interestingly enough, the last point on this thing was get outside help. At some point, if you just realize that
right.
you've got a solid idea and there's a market for it, but you just can't get it off the ground, or you can't take it from pre-revenue to sustainability, get some outside help, get other brains involved that can help you get over the humps that you're continually hitting every day.
In my comment earlier about I'm not sure I'm on board 100% with the business plan idea, I think more comes from people take it too literally. Meaning,
Mhm.
I'm going to put together this voluminous plan that's 50, 60, 100 pages long, right? And to your point, it could be 1 page.
Right.
And so where I'm willing to part with my original perspective is simple yet direct. If you're going to put a business plan together, couple pages. Now again, it's more about the content than it is the number of pages.
Yes.
But if what comes out of that business plan gives you clear direction on who you are, who you're not, and the consumers, the people, the customers you're going to go after, then I think it's a great exercise. So you sold me on it.
Yeah, look, a number of years ago, I joined an entrepreneurs roundtable, and it was run by this guy, Larry Broughton, who I think we've had on the show, and he's done some things for me. We still stay in touch. He owns a hotel company, a management company, so he does really, really well, and he's got great perspectives on business in a lot of different areas. And one of the things he introduced was the one-page business plan, and I still have it. And you go down it and you say, okay, we could fill in a little more here and maybe turn it from 1 to 4 or 5 pages, but it gives you the structure of what's important.
Right.
And that's what's most important, especially when you're starting up and maybe you don't have a business background. Just learn enough things to keep you in the center lane and not leaking off into the woods and die someplace.
And going back to a comment you made just a moment ago, I think one of the most critical things anybody in business can do is to have help and have help ahead of time, right? While I can appreciate we're all going to find ourselves mired in the shit, you don't necessarily want to be looking for help
Right,
when you really need it and when
right.
things are basically teetering on destitute.
Yeah. And
So,
look, one of my favorite sayings is you start a business, you are going to make mistakes. Just don't make everybody else's mistakes.
right.
So, all right, folks, listen, if you want to read this article in depth, and I would encourage you to do so, because if you are in this area that we've been talking about today, this will give you a lot of really good insight. The article is called Top 8 Mistakes Business Owners Make. And then in not in parentheses, but kind of as an afterthought, number 3 is killing more businesses today now than ever. And it was written back in September of 2022. So it's a couple of years old, but it is evergreen in nature. I mean, what they talked about 2 years ago is still alive and well today. And so look at it, find it and read it. You can correspond with the company that wrote it. I think they did a great job with it, and really get an idea of what not to do to be the person that not only births your baby but kills it at the same time. You want to cultivate it long enough for it to live and thrive on its own.
That's a
So
wonderful analogy.
right, right. So folks, thanks for being with us today. As always, we bring out brand new insights and business tips, tactics, and strategies that you can make useful for your business or your professional occupation. We do that every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We also run these same episodes on our YouTube channel, which is the Business Wingman Show. So you want to go on YouTube, you can watch shorts, you can watch small snippets, or you can watch the whole episode. We make all this stuff available for you. So come on back next week and get some more great tips. In the meantime, have yourself a great weekend. Travis, thanks for bringing this up. This was a good topic today. Take care. Talk to y'all soon.